Give me. Go ahead.
Okay, all right, we're going to go ahead and get things started. So, it's our work session, Monday, February 12th at 4:30, Thomas J. Smith, Council Chambers, City Hall.
We're going to roll downhill tonight. We've got a proclamation for the 2017 Officer of the Year, Officer Lucas Peterson. Looking forward to that. We've got some Mayor's Awards as well. Kay Russell, Margie Marshall, Barbara Carlson, Lynn Ozinski, and Joanne Williams. Looking forward to that as well. Number 3 is public hearing, consideration of an application for CDBG pilot program, upper story rental rehab program funds through IEDA.
This is a project that the Southeast Iowa Regional Planning Commission was asked to apply for through IEDA. It's for funds for upper story redevelopment. For this project, they're looking at the bookend buildings area in downtown, specifically 522 Jefferson Street, which is the west bookend building. The grant covers up to $500,000 for rehabilitation cost. They're looking at approximately $800,000 project. This does need to go through the city for application. The funds go to the applicant, and the city's match is $1,000 per living unit. They're proposing 2 units, so it'd be $2,000, and our tax abatement program, existing program, covers that match, so we don't have to supply any direct assistance. It'd just be through the tax abatement program. Dan Eberhardt with the Regional Planning Commission will be here on Tuesday next week. This is, since it's through the CDBG funds, they asked that a public hearing be held, and they have to go through kind of a list of information, the needs, the program. This does benefit 80% of median income limits for Des Moines County. So for a one-person household in Des Moines County, that maximum income is $35,800. 4-person, for example, would be $51,100, and so on. So again, they're looking at right now doing 2 units in that west bookend building. Any questions on that?
Everybody's good?
Yep.
It's good to me. Number 4, public hearing consideration of approval of development agreement with Park West LLC, including annual appropriation tax increment payments, an amount not to exceed $350,000. Mr. Chislin?
This is the final step in the process as we've worked through the Urban Renewal Plan Amendment, the designation of a TIF district, TIF ordinance, and now a development agreement. This lays out some of the more particulars for this project. Some of the requirements as stated under A, developer covenants. Number 2, infrastructure project construction. The developer agrees to complete the construction of infrastructure in accordance with the timeline and specifications in Exhibit C. We do have a couple of exhibits. We will have information, more dates or specific information for the council meeting. Dan, just briefly before the meeting, we'll get that. So it's in the packet before next meeting. But that'll just lay out the time frame for installation of the infrastructure, and then there'll be some estimates on construction commencing for the housing project, and then estimated build-out time. And then Exhibit D will have the developer's estimate on current taxable value, incremental value, and their estimate on payouts for that. So we'll have that information in for the council meeting. But again, back to this number 2, upon completion of the infrastructure project, developers should provide documentation to the city of costs incurred related to completion of the project. Eligible infrastructure costs may include design and construction of the public improvements, landscaping, grading. Upon acceptance of the documentation, the total infrastructure cost shown in the invoices shall be represent the maximum amount of payments that will be made by the city to the developer under this agreement, or $350,000. That's the cap, regardless, is that $350,000 amount. This follows the same process as other TIF agreements or TIF rebates. That's an annual appropriation. And then having the set aside 38.4% is the minimum percentage which is applicable to the low and moderate income set aside. This shall be retained by the city for use in provisions to assist low and moderate income families as required by section 403.22 of the state code. And the city reserves the right to allocate funds accumulated through this in any lawful manner of its choosing. So it has to benefit individuals low to moderate income. It can be anywhere in the city. It can be through a grant program or a direct subsidy or otherwise, but that's something that the council can decide based on the code allowances, what you want to do with those funds. And that comes in as development occurs. It's not a upfront lump sum or anything. It occurs as development builds out, same as this tax rebate. So it won't be something all at once. It'll be continual over the 10-year time period. If you have anything else, Jim, on the tax or TIF rebate process or
No,
anything?
that's at least 2 budget cycles out to have something in place for. But it is something as this moves forward that we'll have to develop a policy for how we would be using that.
Any questions?
Mr. Cahill's here as well, if you have any questions of him.
No, not quite.
Everybody's good?
I'm good.
Number 5 is a resolution approving an agreement with Stanley Consultants, Inc. to perform construction inspection for Mount Pleasant Street Bridge. Mr. McGregor.
In front of you is a resolution approving a professional services agreement with Stanley Consultants, who is also doing the design work on Mount Pleasant Street. This PSA, or professional service agreement, is for the inspection and construction administration. The dollar figure is fairly substantial. It's $541,000, not to exceed dollar figure. I can kind of break that down a little bit. So they're hiring out some of the inspection because it is a bridge. They have to do some piling type work, and that's at like $74,000. So trying to relate it to what if we were to do the inspection, we would charge 7% of the project cost against it, coming to about $305,000. We wouldn't be able to do all the construction inspection. We don't have the qualified people on staff to be able to do a lot of it. And with the workload that we have, I recommend approving this. So I can answer any questions specific about the PSA.
Let me just clarify. So where it says testing for $74,000, that's actually where they are inspecting?
Yep,
Is
they
that
have to
just
hire
another
out.
word for
They
that?
have to send in and have something about the load bearing capability of the pilings, and have to have that sent back in. So
Okay.
we don't have that capability. We don't have any of the testing materials or supplies to be able to do that.
Have you looked at other prices if we tried to do it ourselves?
Another firm, for instance,
No. Have you looked into it to see?
what it would cost us?
Yeah.
Well, we
Even
charge.
if we hired, because I know that we don't have the staff to do it. This is what needs to be, what people want to know is, have we looked at what the price would be, that even if we had to hire somebody temporarily to come in and help?
Put someone on staff. Is that what you're saying?
Thank you, Mr. Billups.
Sure.
What Mr. Billups said, put someone on staff.
Well, what we would charge as far as an engineering towards the project goes is at the same percentage, but we would have to go out and hire somebody. I don't know what that cost would be as far as hiring a temporary staff member, especially for this specific type of work, to bring them on hand to do that type of inspection. That is the reason why you're going to end up paying a premium on having them come in and do the inspection for this specific project.
Nick, on an annual basis, how many projects do you think that we do where if you were to go out and try and find somebody that we would be able to use their expertise? We've got several large infrastructure projects coming up. We're talking about, I'm just thinking 6 years out, I mean, we're going to have the bridge at Cripple Park. I mean, do you feel like it would be worth a bang for our buck to, instead of paying, some of these you're not going to be able to avoid. Sending material off, if we don't have the equipment, we don't have the equipment. But do you feel like it would be worth our dollars and cents to go out and see if we can find somebody that would be able to offer the expertise that we don't currently have in-house?
I don't think it probably would. Regardless of the workload that my current staff has, I don't think that you're going to go out and find a structural inspector like this for fairly cheap to keep them on for a year, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about a year-long project.
But next year we've got projects, and do we have projects that we would use them for the year after?
But to be able to justify somebody of this magnitude to inspect roads, I wouldn't want to pay them that,
Okay.
if you understand what I mean.
I do.
Pay
But
them, pay the premium for that person to inspect something that you could pay somebody less for.
sure. I'm just trying to figure out if there's any way to save the premium that we're paying on, because it seems like we're constantly going out and trying to find people to come in and help us with studies. Well, if we can.
Well, I would say bridges is something that
It's
we're
different.
not,
It's gonna be different, yeah.
we're completely out of scope for that type of work.
All right.
Good. Answered my questions. You guys good?
Good,
Good.
thank you.
Mr. Matt?
And thank you for clarifying what those abbreviations were too. Appreciate that. Nice job.
Number 6 is a resolution approving urban revitalization tax exemptions pursuant to Chapter 404 of the State Code of Iowa Tax Abatements. Stephanie?
So this is an annual resolution that we do that's due to the county, so they know which properties we've approved to get the tax abatement. So you can see in the Exhibit A, it lists all the residential qualifiers that have come in, filled out our form, have qualified. We go through a application process that we make sure they've gotten, they've filled it out, they've gotten their building permits, and they've actually, are occupying it. All those requirements have to be met, and then you meet the February 1st deadline. And then the next step is for you guys to approve it. Then we send over the addresses to the county, and then they take it from there. So you'll see we do have dollar amounts listed. Those are just estimates that are from the building permit. It's up to the county assessor that they'll assess these properties. So those totals really are kind of just dollar figures on the paper. But at least you can see the type of renovations and new residential homes we've had in the last year. And you can see what they've chose, if they've chose the 10-year abatement, the 3-year abatement.
Yes. Very nice.
Does anybody have any questions on the resolution itself or this process that we do?
You guys good?
And then we always, at this time of the year, get the question asked, how much is already being abated? So I do have that schedule.
Sweet.
This comes from the county.
All right. You're doing it, Steph.
And I'll have this available for Leon next week. Because that will be his
Thank you,
question.
Steph.
Thinking ahead. Yeah. So you can see it's comparing the two tax years, the 26 year and the 2017. The exemption change has gone down by about the 412,000. So we do have some properties that are falling off that have either, used their 3 years or 10 years. And then at the bottom, I just kind of put it in dollars and cents. You divide, these are the real assessed values. Again, this is the amount that's being abated. So I do it on our tax rate, so you can see it's close to $540-some thousand each year that's being abated through these programs.
You guys have questions?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Steph. We thank you, and Leon thanks you. Right. Or maybe not. I don't know. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. The first is a resolution approving renewal of taxi cab vehicle for hire license for Robin Canova, doing business as A to Z Taxi, LLC. You guys good? Questions? All right. Just stop me if you need to, if I'm rolling too fast. Number 2 is a resolution awarding bid for the 2017 Law Enforcement Center site work improvements. Big Chief.
Just want to give you a little update on that. I think we're going to award that contract to the lowest bidder, which was Southern Cherry out of Keokuk, for $57,000. That site work improvement was budgeted at $60,000, and the first time we went out was $72,000. But with that said, nobody really bid the asphalt inlay. We're working on options of that, and I think my suggestion is going to be is since we have a concrete contractor on site, it's going to be just as cheaper to go ahead and infill that with concrete. It won't look as pretty, but by the time we paint it and you got cars sitting in there, who's really going to notice the difference? By the plans, we were going to move that entrance to Main Street. It needs to move south or we lose 3 parking spots. Well, with that, there's a utility pole in the way, which they finally got back to us today to get that moved. So there's still, and it doesn't sound like since we're a city entity that they would charge us to do that, but there's a little bit of confusion with that. And so when I really looked at the plan, I thought, well, we need some money for this inlay anyway. What would happen if we eliminate the Main Street exit and use the current, if you think about Valley Street, the way it used to be, where you would pull in off of Valley, drive around, go through the drive-through, then back out. And to me, that not only makes the parking lot flow better, but we can increase our space by 3 sites, and we don't have to move that drive, demolition the sidewalk, get down the grade, and pour a new drive.
Right on.
So they're looking at those options right now, but I think in the long run, when this works, this bid might require a change order for the infill, but it's still going to be. I'm really thinking with the lack of the grade work and the infill, it's going to be almost a push. So, I mean, with that said, I think we're far better off to approve this, get the demo work done, and then when the infill comes along, we'll see if we'll just do that with concrete instead of asphalt. And I think that, you know, it's going to save money. The first time we bid was 72, and we're at 57 now. I don't think that's going to be the end of it, but it's going to be well under what it was bid the first time.
Okay. Okay.
Any questions?
It's great to see.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, number 3 is a resolution approving the purchase of easements from 2830 Weingard Drive, Pen 1131-176-015 for the construction of a storm sewer associated with the Vineyard Drainage Project. Nick McGregor.
So as you stated, the resolution here approves the purchase of a permanent easement for storm sewer associated with the Vineyard easement. This is just a plat. If you want to show the map, that probably gives a better description of what it really is. So we have a storm line that will run. Vineyard Street is actually more like that in reality of the way I would look at north. So that line would run north, dump into the ravine. It is owned by the low rent housing. And so we're not paying anything for the permanent easement. We're going to do some grading work in the area, and they're going to grant us easements through here. So pretty good deal, I think. So recommend approval.
Council?
Good.
Nick says it's a pretty good idea. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of what Nick thinks?
It doesn't cost us any money, so I think he's in the right direction.
Touche on that one. Okay. Thank you, sir. Number 4 is a resolution approving Americans with Disabilities Act's transition plan.
Jesse Howe, city engineer. Eric's working on getting something here for me, I think. So what we're talking about today is the transition plan, and basically what it is a plan that outlines where we're at now, you know, how much we have to do for complete compliance and what we have to do to get there. This plan specifically only addresses sidewalk ramps because it's kind of a bigger topic when you get the Department of Justice coming in and looking at you for compliance. We identify ramp replacement priorities, how we monitor and track which ones are compliant, which ones aren't, and we also have a grievance procedure that's included in the plan to where if there's somebody with disabilities and they have a hard time, you know, making a transition on a sidewalk or across the street or something, they can submit that and get it in front of us. Why do we need a transition plan? Again, like I said,
the government said so.
Yeah, so
That's why.
right. In 1990, the Department of Justice required public entities with more than 50 staff members to upgrade all of this ADA type of stuff. So they knew that a lot of the communities couldn't do it right away. So as a substitute for that, you can develop this transition plan and say, well, here's what we know is out there, and here's how we're planning to address it. Enforcement on that, if you don't have a good plan in place, it can look just like what the DNR is doing on sewer separation with us. In fact, they've done that with Cedar Rapids, where they come in and say, okay, now you have to replace this much on this schedule, or, you know, you're going to get fined and everything else. So, you know, really by putting this in place, it's more of a bargaining chip if something ever happens like that. So our compliance strategy, I kind of have it boiled down here for just the curb ramps, though. At some point, we may add, building ADA compliance.
That,
and
we're only
sidewalk.
10% compliant with, man, I thought we did more than that.
Well, we've been doing a lot lately. In some of the intersections, you'll see where they have the stamped-in concrete, and that's actually not compliant per the current regulations.
I thought they said that, I thought that was going to, that they were gonna look past that was gonna apply.
Well, you'll see on my next couple of slides, we're going to address those last. We don't really have those on a heightened priority, and I'll get to that later. But technically, right now, per the current standards, those are not acceptable.
Why are they not compliant?
Because,
The government said so.
yeah, basically, what it
Because
gets
it
down
still
to,
provides a graded slope, right?
it provides a graded slope, and they have those domes stamped in there.
Uh-huh.
But those domes pop off a lot of the time.
Yep.
And another part of why they have them there are for people that have trouble seeing things. They have to be clearly distinguishable from the rest of the concrete is what they tell you. So they have to have those red truncated dome panels in there or they're non-compliant.
Now, Jesse, those are the ones that look kind of like Legos? That's
Yep,
what you're okay,
yep.
got it.
Yep, and predominantly in town we use the red ones. There's some other organizations that'll use yellow ones, but that's really what you need. You're supposed to have the visual contrast in the sidewalk ramp.
So you're saying that they don't like the Legos, Jesse? Let's get a clarification.
They do like the Legos. They don't like the stamps.
stamps.
Oh, thank you. They
That
do
look
like
like
the
Legos.
Legos.
They do like the Legos.
Appreciate that.
Right. So basically how we're addressing this is we've had $40,000 in our budget to address sidewalk ramps, and I believe that was road use tax based. What we also will continue doing, and we've done for the last few years, is when we upgrade a road and we have a crosswalk through that road, both the ramps on either side get replaced at that point in time. So you're not just going out and, going all over town replacing ramps. And then, again, we're allowing for that grievance process to where if somebody in town has an issue, they can let us know, and we'll move that to the top of the list.
We've only got 17,000 of them, Jesse.
Yep.
So, we should be jamming on that, right?
We do a handful every year. Probably last year, I'd venture to say we were around 100.
You guys are everybody. Yeah, you guys are everywhere doing them. But yeah, when you
is-
got 17,000, I guess.
There's nothing to protect us though to say that what we're doing now is compliant if they come in and change the rules another 5 years from now? Because what we were doing before was compliant previously, right? Yes, no,
Not exactly.
not exactly.
There was a point in time where it was, but you
Yeah.
can look at like Mount Pleasant Street as an example of where we put in
The
the
stamp.
stamp.
Yeah.
And it wasn't compliant, and
And-
they had us take them out and put them in
Okay.
appropriately.
Federal Highway came in and did their review, and we had to take out all the stamped ones and put in
Okay.
Lego type.
How many
Well,
of those do we have?
Legos rule.
Most of those are in that 2%
Okay.
with the stamped.
But you do have them listed somewhere, so in case they would come in 10 years from now and say, hey, these are all, we can say, well, we did these before and they were compliant.
Yeah.
Not that that matters.
Yeah, every time we do one, we have our GIS database, and it's not something you can see on the Des Moines County GIS, but our internal one, we'll have a date on it and a project that we upgraded it with, and what the slopes were, and all that good stuff. So our replacement priority, like we were talking about earlier, the highest priority will be the ones that we get grievances about, where there's an immediate need. The second will be the non-compliant curb ramps in high traffic areas, so around schools, public buildings, that type of thing. Those are where we're going to focus on with that $40,000 a year. And then the non-compliant curb ramps in the bicycle and pedestrian plan, and then you get down to where, there's ones that have never been touched before, but hopefully as we repair all the streets around town, we get to those where we're not really chasing it with the $40,000 a year type of funds. So, and then the lowest priority there were the curb ramps that were compliant at one time, but not anymore.
So budget-wise, we can do about 40 of them a year, give or take.
Thereabouts. Depends, how complex they are. If they got really steep slopes, sometimes we have to put retaining walls in and that type of thing.
Okay.
But it's about 40 a year with that set aside money, and then, generally another 50 or so with road funds.
Do we have, no, that's nothing, I'll talk to you about that off to the side, it's no big deal.
Okay.
You guys have any other questions for Jesse?
State-wise, is it called grievance problem when they have a problem? I don't like that name.
Well,
Sorry.
that's
It's just a personal thing.
there's kind of templates for these things, and it's
Okay.
just a grievance process is
Oh, okay.
how they refer to it. So I didn't do much with that.
Jesse, other than the sidewalks, is
Mhm.
there anything else in the community that needs to be addressed from an ADA compliance standpoint?
Yeah, there is, and in fact, we had a complaint come through for the depot where, you know, there was some uneven stuff. We addressed all of that pretty quickly because we already had plans to do it. But within buildings, like most of your restroom type fixtures and things, the ADA is really specific on where you put the, you know, paper towel dispensers, sinks, all kinds of stuff. So
if you look in the CIP plan, this is one where this is a study that or piece that we're implementing now. 2 years out, we'll roll out the buildings as one that we're looking to get the plan put together on that.
So that'll include government buildings
Yes.
and privately owned structures?
Not
No,
privately owned.
Not
just
privately
public.
owned, just government buildings? Okay.
So it'll be like parks, this building, different library, that type of thing.
Okay.
And then sidewalks eventually, but that one's going to be a pretty complex issue to tackle as well.
The library is not going to have probably a significant number, is it? I mean, I'm assuming it would have been built with those standards, right?
It shouldn't have a tremendous amount, but I'd say that
Yeah.
even if it potentially has some.
It could potentially, but it would be a lot lower, like moving, you know, toilet paper holders, that type of thing.
Okay.
Part of the issue there is that just because it was built fairly recently, you still, not everyone who's building to ADA standards is really building to what the Department of Justice looks at as what the appropriate standards should be.
Okay.
And I think that's probably been the largest thing we found, is even with the depot, as we went to do that. You want to address that kind of? Sure.
Yeah, the standard that they use on buildings and some of the vertical clearances and the protruding objects, I mean, you're talking a quarter of an inch, and they will quote write you up for those issues. And so when we had the audit done at the depot, we were able to take care of quite a few with just staff on hand, moving certain objects. You know, for instance, the trash can was out of compliance, and all you literally have to do is just move it over, but it was out of compliance per their audit. To give you kind of an understanding, even though it's newer, it doesn't necessarily mean it is in compliance.
Right.
Cedar Rapids, they did a Iowa League of Cities ADA presentation on it, and they built a brand new building, and they spent $7 million on the building, and they had to come back the very next year and spend $750,000 to fix all the ADA issues that were non-compliant. So it's one, contractors not understanding how they're supposed to be fixed.
Right.
I think they actually have an ADA person on hand at Cedar Rapids that goes out and inspects it all for them because they have the consent order to do all these things. We're not at that point. And so like they said, this transition plan will just be for curb ramps and eventually sidewalks, and then for facilities.
And we're 2 years away from focusing.
Next step, yeah.
Okay.
And
So like this building is going to probably have.
oh, this building will, and you know, even as we've been talking about it, starting to do some upgrades to some of the restrooms, we want to make sure that as we do those upgrades, that those aren't that we don't do them in a way that doesn't fit
Into the ADA compliance.
Or you spend money now that you end up tearing out in 2 years.
Right.
So as we do those kind of upgrades, we do them whether we have a facility, a full facility plan or not, but we will do those to the extent we can in compliance with the standards that we need to hit.
And the best part about getting one of these transition plans in place is, as Jesse alluded to, is you can keep them away from you, sort of thing. If you get a complaint, something that gets to the attorney, the U.S. Attorney's Office or the Department of Justice, if you provide them a transition plan and say, listen, we understand that that's out of compliance, we are working towards it, it's in 2 years from now we'll be able to fix that properly. They won't send anybody. They'll typically just write a letter and respond, thank you, and make sure this gets fixed. But it's when they show up at your front door with smart levels and, run around town checking everything that's out of compliance.
You don't want them to do
That's
that.
when you have that. That's what we want to try to avoid.
Just so you know, these chairs are out of ADA compliance. I've been trying to tell Jim that, he doesn't get it, so somebody make sure that registers in his head. Are you guys good?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, let's flip the page. Number 5 is resolution approving application for funds through the Community Catalyst Building Remediation Program from the Iowa Economic Development Authority.
This is a program that allows a maximum grant award of $100,000 for a project in a community. It's designed to assist communities with redevelopment, rehab, or deconstruction of buildings to stimulate economic growth or reinvestment in the community. And there's $1 million available statewide. Again, maximum grants $100,000. 40% of the funds are awarded to cities with populations under 1,500. So about 6 grants statewide for cities larger than 1,500. So it is a competitive grant application. There was a pre-application process that we went through. We did, I guess, go through that process, and we're allowed to continue on looking to apply for the former police building at 412 and 424 North 3rd Street for this process. Again, the city must be the applicant and provide financial assistance or in-kind resource. Part of our assistance was the sale price of the building. We also have tax abatement that would qualify as assistance as well. And again, looking at what the impact is on the community, specifically downtown in this case, and driving some economic growth or reinvestment in the community, and feel that hotel and what they're looking to do would be a very positive project to submit. But again, just with the amount of funds available, it's not guaranteed, but something that we're working through the process on. Applications are due beginning of March, and I'm not sure the award date, if that's in May or June, but I think the turnaround time's fairly soon on that. So, is it? Okay.
This is something this was a grant that Steve Freever and Charlie Nichols had gone to a presentation on right around Thanksgiving. This is when they rolled it out, and you essentially had to have a project in hand at that point to be able to move forward on this. So it wasn't something where we could go and you had to be able to identify something that you could work on very quickly.
Right on.
Is this an annual thing? So every year we can
I don't know
apply
if
for
this will be or not. Do you have an idea on that, Steve?
It's the first time it's been offered.
Steve, if you want to come up.
On their website, it says funding based on annual availability, but we don't know if it.
Yeah, this is the
funded.
first time IEDA has done this, so it remains to be seen whether it's an annual thing. So the timing was really good for this particular project. So
Great.
I think the part of what they're going to want to make sure that whatever projects that they choose, that they can be very successful on, and they can really point to having an impact in those local communities, because this is something they're trying to sell it on a statewide basis for potential future funding.
And the ripple effect of this project could be fairly far-reaching. Right.
Everybody's good? All right, I can dig it. Number 6 is a resolution of supporting and approving application to the Wellmark Foundation's large match grant application for the improvements to D. Edwin and Gladys White Memorial Park. Mr. Chisholm.
We applied for funds, I think as a separate grant through Wellmark last year, just based on the timing. We want to apply again this year. We do have funds available for the project, but would be able to, I guess, if we receive funds, create a little larger project and also maybe divert some of our funds to other projects. So based on the timing, we wanted to go forward with this application. Similar project, if Stephanie could show up on the overhead, for those that are fairly new to council, what the plan is with White Park. Look, a lot of the lots lots around this area are very small lots, very limited yard space to be able to, whether it's play soccer or catch or football or something in that aspect, but allowing a larger open play field there, replacing the playground with a new playground and some new walkways there as well. Looking at different playground site concepts, kind of an open, visible or view shed there through the playground for safety and making the families comfortable that are there, as well as being able to see anywhere that you're at in that area. So that's kind of the concept that we're looking at. And again, we have Starker funds allocated to this project, but if we're able to get some outside funding to maybe enhance the project and also potentially divert some of those funds elsewhere. One thing on the shelter, we have awarded bid on the shelter. That will happen this spring regardless, and still working through the play field, quite a few sewers in this area.
So the shelter is a for sure thing this summer?
Yep.
Wow.
Working through with Public Works, there's quite a few sewers. This is, I don't have the map here, but combined sewers in this area are crisscross the field, so seeing how we can work with that on the open play field concept as well.
What's the cost of the playground? What did we have budgeted on that? Do you remember?
Total project was around $100,000.
And what's the grant application amount for?
It's up to $100,000, one-to-one match.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that out, my friend. I'm really surprised that you did, but I appreciate it. I know it's totally against your character. Let's just keep moving. We don't need any problems tonight.
So Eric, you said it's a 1-to-1 match, so if we're gonna spend $100,000, we're gonna get 50 from them? Or,
If we spend 50, we could get 50 from them.
sure, if they award us 100, is it based off your project size, or they'll say?
No, it's based on what we'd apply for. And
Okay.
the shelter probably wouldn't be part of that because it could be done beforehand. It's money that you haven't spent, so we can kind of go over what amount. If our total project's $100,000, we'd probably apply for 50 and spend 50 and then save that extra 50 from Starker.
And then do we use the money paid for the project as match money then? Or for the shelter?
What's that?
Is shelter money being used as the match money?
No, just total project,
Okay.
total park project.
Any other questions?
Nope. John's excited, wants to get in with his inner child to hang out on the swings.
I think it's a great thing.
I'll join them, man. I love it.
It's
Okay.
kind of a good timing project too. They're working on a rehab project at Maple Hills Apartments as well, so that'll have a transformation there as well. So.
It's always good. Okay, you guys satisfied? Yep. All right, let's move to the public hearings. A is consideration of plans and specs for the 2018 Tama Building permeable alley. I'm just going to roll down. If you guys want to say something, please feel free. B is consideration of plans and specs for the 2018 Agency Street widening project, East End. C is consideration of an ordinance rezoning the property locally known as 333 Kern Street from R2 Single Family Residential to C1 Limited Commercial Zoning District. D is consideration of an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Burlington, Iowa by amending provisions pertaining to the standard penalty penalty applicable to certain, struggling, man. Certain.
You got it.
Thinking
You
of
got it,
ascertain,
man. You can
man.
get it. You can get it.
He's
Okay,
actually
all right,
tough like I am.
let me do this. I can do this. 333, consideration of an ordinance rezoning the property locally known as,
Where are you at?
are we going to do this?
Yeah, here, you're on.
Consideration of an ordinance amending, I blame this on,
Do you want me to read it?
I can do this, I can do this. Mayor Pro Tem, I can do this.
I can sign it for you.
Read it for me, please.
Which one?
Consideration of an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Burlington, Iowa by amending provisions pertaining to the standard penalty applicable to certain sections of the code and violations thereof. And so, anything? Okay. All right then. I know, it was ugly. 8 is public hearings previously scheduled by City Council. A is a consideration of general obligation loan agreement and the principal amount not to exceed $8,500,000. And then B is consideration of 2018 amendment to urban renewal plan for Burlington Consolidated Urban Renewal Area related to use of incremental property tax revenues for public improvements. That is March 5th for both of those. So we're moving on to discussion. Huh?
You also had E, said consideration of the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. You kind of
He did skip over.
Yes, James. Thank you. And E, consideration of fiscal year 2018-2019 budget. Thank you so much. I'm having a hard time reading tonight. It happens to me every once in a while. So are we good now?
I'll schedule your eye appointment for you.
I appreciate that. Make sure you give me the doctor that's really cheap.
Okay.
All right. Future budget. Let's talk about it.
All right, gave you a couple of sheets
Dun, dun, dun,
for
dun.
actual stuff you did at your spots, and Eric, maybe you can put them up on the overhead. You can only put one sheet up at a time, but we'll look at what we have for FY19 is a balanced budget, but out years start to have some progressively growing deficits. I did modify the numbers a tad from what we talked about during the budget cycle, and the two things that I modified in there, I increased the growth rate on the ambulance revenues. We've been growing more like 5% annually for ambulance revenues, and I changed it to match that. And we've also seen property valuations have been up a little bit more than what our 15-year average has been the last couple of years. Part of that has a little, changes can occur there that you can't really, from one cycle to another, that can be higher or lower. We've had 0.6% growth, 0.7% growth, and so I hesitate to have the rate of growth increase because of that in the future. But I did increase it from 1.8% annual growth to about 2%, and more because we're releasing TIF value than because of any other changes that are going on. But doing those two factors in there lowered out, like for example, fiscal year 2023, we've been talking about closer to $940,000 deficit. That brings that down to $730,000. And that gives you an idea too. You take a couple of big revenue sources, those are two pretty good sized revenue sources for us in the general fund, and you make some, you tweak what the percentage growth is, and you can make some phenomenal differences in what your outcomes are. You see that at a federal level as a 10-year budget gets presented. What gets presented for a scenario can make a huge impact on the outcome. So that being said, it's not designed to say that there's magic that I know what the answers or what the deficit is actually going to be, but based off of what trends are, this is where we would potentially see where will likely be as we get out into those out years. But we can't handle operating deficits of 130,000, then 380,000, then 675,000, then 740,000 over the next 4 years without making changes of some type. And there are an awful lot of different options for what we can talk about for how we get there that aren't on the end of, we had a discussion at the end of the last budget discussion. Matt presented the idea of using an increase of revenues as one way to try to achieve balanced budget along with a couple of other things. There wasn't a tremendous amount of support shown at that. This is the other avenue or primary avenue. There are others besides it, but this is the other side.
This gives us some
looking at what cuts can you make rather than what new revenue source can you look at to try to achieve the elimination of the deficits. And I wanted to put in different combinations, not to say that anything is preferred, but just to say this is the kind of change or the kind of impact you can have on those operating deficits by looking at these different combinations of things to make cuts to. It may be that you don't want to do any of them. It may be that there's a whole different set that you can look at or want to look at, but this is at least one way to go about it. And all of them have a discussion of police and fire, and there's a big reason why that is. Those are the positions that were grant funded that the funding source ends, and there isn't an identified source for how we cover those expenditures moving forward. So that, to me, makes sense that those are two of the primary things that we consider is eliminating the positions that you're funding with those grant sources. But with that being said, option 1 looks at eliminating the 1 grant-funded police position and all 6 fire positions that are funded through the SAFER grant. As you look at that, just the way especially the SAFER grant is done on that, the final 2 years of is it 1 or 2 years where we're at 65%. Last year of the grant we're at 65%. We have a significant cost in there that you have to hold on to positions when grant funding is getting seriously depleted, and we're going to have those expenditures. We can't get rid of a deficit for those by eliminating the positions at the end of the grant. There has to be some source of funds to try to offset the deficit that is accumulating to cover our match. With that in mind, I looked at the dedicate part of the manor sale project as that one-time funding source. I don't advocate using something like that to cover ongoing operational costs, but if you're using it to fill a specified time gap, it can be done to help you work through it. And I wanted to put that in there just so you can think about that as an option, not to use that as a sole thing to try to deal with it, because you can't. This is an ongoing cost.
Right on.
And I also, so as you look at that with that top example, the first year when you allocate a significant portion of the manor sale, you end up with if you do that in fiscal year 2020, the general fund will have a good sized positive balance, but then you use it to try to help offset what ends up being ongoing deficits in the 3 years after it, primarily in 21, where you're transitioning between a grant running out and the SAFER grant running out and the time where you can look at eliminating positions. It ends up with a total over 4 years, for those 4 years, a total deficit of 26,000, so we're not quite doing it. That being said, even that 26,000 isn't getting you as far as you really need to be. Your general fund balance should be growing over time if you're going to stay at a 15% of expenditures when you know your expenditures each year grow 10. So we should be seeing actually over 4 years that general fund balance should be growing by 150,000. Matching it dollar for dollar, I'm not as concerned about, because you are making projections 5 years out, but getting close is important. I did option 2 throws in some different things that you can look at. Looking at instead of 6 fire positions, only 3 at the end of the grant. It has that altered CTAA, the city township. What am I thinking of? Ambulance Association, CTAA. Within that formula right now, it currently has 12 personnel allocated towards ambulance service. It has some of the management oversight positions that are included in that, and out of that, we balance out the revenues that are reflected within the ambulance department versus those expenditures. If there's a deficit in there, the CTAA pays their percentage of the call basis of that deficit. So we do that on a 3-year rolling average. Our current 3-year rolling average for the percentage of ambulance calls that's outside of our city limits, but in the CTAA boundaries it's been at 17%. So they pick up 17% of the operating costs. This altered CTA cost allocation would be suggesting to move 3 more personnel over into that ambulance staffing funding scenario, which would make sense based off of the changes that have occurred within what the department is and the personnel it takes to truly run it. You could almost make an argument to add 6 positions over there. I think that might be a little strong to go with 6, but 3 certainly is justified. 6 would be fully staffing 3 separate ambulances at all times to provide ambulance service, but that's not necessarily, we're not quite to where we are always staffing through 3 ambulances at all times with our current staffing scenario. If you do that, I've just made an estimate based off of maintaining those 3 positions and what the revenue growth would be on the ambulance side for revenue. What would the impact be? Actually, I didn't even think about the revenue growth because this is just looking at the additional cost and the impact of that. The revenue growth is in there regardless. There, 17% of our costs were 3 personnel, and putting that against the deficit. 17% of our costs in 21, as an example, is $25,000. It grows to 33, and then 48. And the reason it grows so much is the roll-off of the grant funding, and we do the 21 is based off of our fiscal year 20 operations. So we look at fiscal year 20 actual operations, what the result of the expenditures versus revenue were, and then they pay us the following year their pro rata share of that deficit. So it falls, the change in that is going to fall behind where we see changes in our expenditures. But you can't do that and have it work by itself. You could though look at, as we end our current 3-year agreement on the auditorium service, not renewing that contract and having a lower level of service there. That is an option, and that's something that we have had discussions on at a council level over the course of the last year or 2. So that's something that you can look at, and I put there in fiscal 21 $100,000 savings, and then in 22 up to 200,000, and that reflects the contract ending at midway through a year.
And that's what the goal was for that, to become self-sufficient somewhat. So.
Well, that's
somewhat.
not necessarily. I mean, theoretically, you could say you can let them continue to operate it with no city subsidy or a significantly reduced city subsidy. Or you could look at it as from the perspective of if you can operate it with that significantly reduced subsidy, we're going to take it back over and we're going to reduce the staffing level on it.
Okay.
And that was one of the options that we had talked about last year.
We've been wrestling with this for a long time, with this auditorium deal, so.
And the problem is that you're 2 months into a new arrangement with that, and it's kind of hard to put that out there. And yet, as you start to think about how are you going to address this as we move into the future, you got to be thinking through what are the alternatives you're at least willing to be talking about to try to make that happen.
It's hard to keep the auditorium or talk about it though without understanding what the next 2.5 years looks like. So,
Sure.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
I'm already hopeful of it, to be honest with
I'm
you.
hopeful too, man.
Because they had a great crowd there Saturday night, and they have Extreme Midget Wrestling coming up March 30th.
What?
So
Nobody sent me an invitation? They should have at
No,
least sent one to Jim, but anyways.
I mean, it's not,
I'm a participant. I'm not.
that's lighthearted, but I do have high hopes that they're going to be able to turn that around.
So too, Jim.
Yeah, I don't like to have, yes, it's something for us to think about, as maybe like a 2-way conversation of we're going to reduce, how can you be self-sufficient for them, but as far as just banking on them not, I don't want to do that. So I don't see that as an option for one of any of these.
It would be pretty
alternatives.
hard to say that was an option for you to say now.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you need to have a definitive solution, but what are you at least willing to consider?
Sure.
The other page had a couple of other options, and something that the big thing about this is just going to be pushing a bill that is being considered at the state legislature and how that could potentially impact this whole discussion moving forward. There is a bill in for enhanced funding on ground emergency medical transport, GEMT. That is federal funds that flows through the state. There have been a few states that have signed on to this. Just getting signed on, though, is not the only stuff that needs to happen to happen, is my understanding of how this process works. And
What's that gonna mean to us, Jim?
so if the state does pass this, it's attached to we have the deauthorization bill or the deappropriation bill on the, I think on the Senate side, not the House side. The two bills don't match, so it's
Right.
on one of them. If it stays on that and is part of that and gets approved, we get authorized on that. When all the mechanics are gotten in place on that, it should mean, and I have in here 350,000. I'm not sure what the dollar amount is. As Chief Troxel talked about it, you thought that you could potentially see up to 400,000 come through on this for funding. This is that bill moving through, and what it means for impact on operations is very significant.
What's it do?
Medicare funding for. Do you want to talk about what the mechanism is designed to do and what it's providing reimbursement for that we don't currently get?
It's actually to make up the cost of medical transport for Medicaid patients. So
it's like a backfill.
So currently, an average transport in Burlington, you get $121 or so for a Medicaid patient. This lets you recoup the rest of the cost. So
It was like $75. Is that what it was? It was like $75.
Well, I just asked Dana the other day. She said $121 what we get.
What's it cost us?
Well, our bill depends on the type of calls, $600, but you can actually recoup the cost. So there's a very complex formula for us to figure out what does an ambulance transport cost us. It's not $600 that we normally bill. It's actually more than that. You have to take your budget and the number of calls. Anyway, looking at Muscatine, they kind of figured theirs out. We kind of went off of theirs. What their cost is, we'd be very similar in cost of transport. What we have over Muscatine is way more Medicaid patients than they have. We had about 1,000 transports last year that were Medicaid patients, so it's somewhere around a third of our transports in Burlington. So compared to 200 or 300 in Muscatine, so that's where we make them.
Chief, while you're standing there, the four options Jim's presented of the three of the four include eliminating at least 3 fire positions, if not 6. So when we took on the grant, you basically provided an outline to show an extreme need for the positions that were hired.
Right.
So one of my questions is going to be if we lose the 3 positions, obviously if we know if we lose the 6, we're back where we were before. But if we lose the 3 positions, one of the things that you brought up during that description for need was the 2 in, 2 out rule. If we lose those 3 positions, does it put us back in a position where we could potentially have that arise again?
Well, it would depend on what we do with minimum staffing. So if you leave minimum staffing where it is now at 11 per shift, each day there's at least 11 firefighters on duty. That allows us to have the 3rd ambulance staff. So you could reduce 3 firefighters total and keep 11 minimum staffing. We'd still have 3 ambulances all the time. And it's the ambulance that goes with the engine that provides your 2 in and 2 out. Because our engines only have 2 on them, not a driver and a officer. So yes, what we save by having the 6, of course, is the overtime cost. So we keep 11 staffing, so you kind of have a little bit of a cushion in there. If somebody calls in sick or is hurt, you're not hiring overtime every time somebody's hurt or sick. So this year we're going to have really good overtime, good as in not spending near as much money as we've spent in the past, which is great for our department, for the guys, for the city not to spend, $150,000, $200,000 on overtime, because it's not healthy for our department to spend that kind of, have people work those kind of hours. So
sure, they
need their time off. So yeah, so going down to 3, yes, we could do that but we'd have to increase our overtime dollars or budget. But we could still pretty much run like we are right now.
How much do you think that would increase?
We were different years. It's hard to say. $170,000 to $180,000 a year.
It's tough when
You're right.
It just depends. You can have a really good year, and then the next year have 2 people that are on long-term injuries, and it just
You were just
really
over 100,000 or just under this year, right?
Well, we're right at, I think the last time I looked, we were in the 70,000.
70.
But that early summer,
Oh, okay.
before we got the grant, we were down. We had a couple people hurt, and we had a lot of overtime. This last payroll, we had 1 overtime shift, so doing way better.
So how'd the the Great Brush Fire of 2018, how'd that turn out? Everybody make it
Oh
home safe?
yeah, it turned out great. Yeah, we had a good response. So that's where we spend our overtime, and that's kind of what we, if you're gonna have overtime, that's what you want it for, right? When you have a big event, you call people in off duty, and they're there for 3-4 hours, and then they go home. You don't like them working double shifts, 24 extra hours or 48-hour shift.
You guys good?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
Something with that to show, I put in there even a couple examples with that enhanced ambulance funding. You could try to do a scenario where you don't reduce any of the fire positions and reduce the auditorium, or you could do it where you don't impact the auditorium and reduce some staffing at the option 4 there, where you reduce 3 positions in the fire department at the end of the grant, to try to get to that scenario where you get an okay ongoing budget. Within those, I guess that last one kind of talks about what kind of impacted the funding from if that legislation goes through the state and we get enhanced Medicare funding, Medicaid funding. When we get money from the CTAA, it's based off operating losses. So if we get money from a statewide level, it will at least be partially offset by losing some of the revenue that we would be collecting from CTAA, because the nice thing is that extra funding means that we'll be operating at a surplus on the operational side. Still having to buy equipment, but at least for operations, it would have enough funds there to cover our cost for operations potentially. So we'll lose the $30,000 to $35,000 we're receiving currently from the CTAA, and potentially even if you move 3 additional personnel over into that funding scenario, you may still be where you're receiving effectively nothing towards operations. And I kind of wanted to be able to show that with all the CTAA cost allocation being at 0, even with in both of those scenarios, probably losing some of that. And really, that's just to give you the things that I can think about that we have talked about and over the course of the last 6 to 12 months.
Oh, dude, this is it. That's it.
These are the kind of things, at least, that we have been the major talking points about what could potentially be looked at. And you may want to go some other route. You may say, that none of this is viable. None of these things work. We want to go back to Matt's proposal, or you may say we want to go to a different proposal.
Bringing up the franchise fee, at the end of the day, we just have to decide if either A, we're going to make adjustments, or B, we want to try and come up with a different funding source. I'm not a huge fan of getting rid of firefighters, but if Chief says that with the 3 that he can adjust and still be able to operate, then that's something to definitely take with us down the road. I'm not a giant fan of eliminating a police position. I think that's something we just got to a point where we're able to operate and handle the call load we've got. I'd like to see us add to that actually over time to be able to do some different things. But that's the biggest question we have to answer is, do we just adjust the budget if we can? There's some big numbers there that we're relying on, right, Jim? If that doesn't make its way through the Senate, if the enhanced ambulance funding doesn't come in, those are all some.
Those are big numbers, yes.
Yeah.
And and backfill still sits out there as a potential headwind.
I knew you'd come through. I knew you'd come through.
We haven't made it through a council meeting without using the term backfill in it.
It's just a significant thing that sits out there. I don't model that in as a potential loss.
It's always
anywhere.
looming.
but it's something that could potentially happen.
I mean, I think until the state's done with their session, I don't know that we can do a whole lot. We need to know what those numbers look like before, and what those programs look like before we can come up with solutions to our issues.
I appreciate this. Everybody's got a foundation. We know what we've got to deal with, and what, you know.
Well, and you know, the thing is regarding the fire or police, I appreciate the fact that we're trying to save money on the OT, but the fact of the matter is overtime happens. I mean, it's happening in factories every day right now. There's one factory in town that I have friends that work at. They've had mandatory overtime since I can recall, since I've been around. So as long as that overtime cost doesn't outweigh the expense, and it looks to me like there is some room there. So, and that is going to go up and down from time to time. My thing would be I'd be in favor of an option of a blend of 3 and 4, because I think my belief is that we are going, should be able to reduce the auditorium. Maybe not in the agreement, but we should be able to modify that after 3 years. So there's some talented people there, and they should be able to figure out a way to run that cheaper. That's why we put them in charge. So I'm more in favor of let's curtail some spending until we see how things rebound, than increasing any further taxes, whether it be property or franchise fee or anything like that. So
I just want to throw out there just to remind everybody, not that you need the reminder, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's year to year, and sometimes as you make decisions, most of these decisions, they're not long-term decisions. Nothing stays the same. These are temporary decisions. So whether it's more money we have to pinch, it's not long-term. You have to look at that. Sometimes you just have to do things to get over the hump, and it happens in households. It happens to me all the time. We have to make business decisions, and I just want to remind everybody that as we do move forward, that again, once we do something, it's not like it's locked in. Oh my goodness!
I agree. A discussion doesn't necessarily mean a decision.
Right.
And I've told a lot of people that over the past 10 days. A discussion doesn't necessarily mean a decision. And I'm grateful to have this, Jim.
Yep.
Gives us some more options to play around with, and thank you.
Are we good? I mean, it's not like we're making a decision on this budget tonight. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with Matt. We're kind of stuck on something.
Yeah, we can't do anything until we figure out what we've got in front of us. So, but thanks for putting this together, because it's good news.
As we talk with the rating agency this week, and we talk about how we're dealing with our upcoming deficits, how would the council like us to frame what your attitude is for trying to deal with this?
I would say probably, in my opinion, that we'd be looking at future cuts to spending.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I would say you can present this to them. So these are 4 options that we're considering. That and that should, I would think. I'm not normally used to dealing with bonding agencies, but I would say that those are 4 options we're looking at. So we are trying to be proactive.
But these are things that are on the realm of realism for how you would have.
For me, yes.
To deal with this.
Yes.
Some of them.
Just for me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to be fiscally conservative and probably get our scissors out.
I'll tell you what, I want to remain positive. I still want to remain positive, and you never know what could happen throughout this year. So, but we also have to hold the gym for no and be prepared for news that we might not want to get. So, but yeah, I can appreciate this, and I think we're good to go on that.
Thank you for the work on that.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Okay.
He's talking to Jim. You want to read another ordinance or something?
Yes, yes.
He wants more practice.
City buddy appointments. We've got Linda Hild for
I think you have enough photos.
Linda Hild for the low rent housing.
There you go.
Was not in the packet.
Right.
We had it. Katie didn't get it put on, but it will be on for next week unless we had an objection that came up. Just wanted to let you know about that is an additional appointment that we'll have for next week's consideration.
And actually, I
Is
had
she joining
another.
all of those?
Huh?
Is she joining all of them?
No.
Or- I'm
She's
sorry.
there, her interest, I think it's just low
That's
rent,
just,
right?
Okay.
when people fill out an application, they
Yeah,
go
I
what
saw
they
it,
would
I saw it.
potentially be interested in.
I also
No,
had a
she's not
second
joining all of them, just the low rent housing.
that I just have to get a confirmation if it's if she lives within 2 miles of the city
Okay.
limits. And you want me to give that name tonight, or?
I think you probably want to wait.
Okay,
until you
okay.
know. But, yeah, there's 3 openings on the low rent housing. We need to get some filled so they can get a quorum.
And I also need a gentleman, and I won't say a man, I need a gentleman on the animal control board. It's a tough job, and I've got nothing but ladies, and God bless them, they're working so hard. But I do need I need some manpower on there. I need somebody that knows how to work with these wonderful ladies that have such a tough job. So if there's anybody out there that's interested, it's a tough job. You're dealing with people and their pets, but it still has to be done. And if there's anybody out there that is interested, if you are a gentleman, we certainly could use you. And you can fill out an application on the city website. You can do that online. That's all I have on appointments.
And are all the other appointments okay?
I'm good.
They were fine with me.
They seem good, yeah.
I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. We've come to the end, my friends. You guys have been so patient tonight. Mr. Tislin?
I'm going to be adding, we had an agreement with the Burlington Schools, a proposed agreement. We're going to have a set date for hearing on that, so that'll be for the February 26th work session and March 5th council meeting, so we'll have discussion at that time on the proposed agreement for use of the tennis courts.
Mrs. Murray, Counselor.
Yes, I had the opportunity to attend the Chocoholic Frolic last weekend.
They should have never let
If
you go.
you were not there, you missed out. As a dietitian, I was in heaven because you know when you eat a lot of chocolate, it is mood enhancing. So I was happy all day long, and I know you're going to blame it on the glass that I had at Olive Wine, but no, it was not that. The chocolate was really, really good. In fact, I am going to plan on going to downtown Burlington and buying Valentine gifts for all my sweeties because they have some really great Valentine Day gifts down there. So I'm really, really excited. And for the 10 cross-country skiers in Burlington, the snow is really, really good at Stars Cave right now. So I'll see you out there on the slopes. I guess you don't call it slopes when you ski.
On the flatland.
On the flatlands, yes.
Mr. Billups, Counselor.
Well, you have chocolate, I have Budweiser. Anyway, yeah, great event at the auditorium this last week with the Memorial Auditorium. They were packed house. It was fantastic.
What was the show?
It was MMA fights. Good fights all the way around.
I bet that
One
was
was
good.
a little bit of a clunker, but it was great to see the place full. And so it was working well, and that's a good job. So out of that, that's it.
MPT.
Of course. Well, with Valentine's Day coming around, there's all kinds of stuff going on downtown. Bent River is having something, and they're having live music. Check that out. The library, of course. They're having cookie decorating, and it's a free event. So you just have to, register. But,
Do you need judges for that?
cookies and books, you can't go wrong. There's just, I think something is going on at every place downtown. The Art Center has Valentine's Day dinner. You have to get reservations, so you got a couple days still for that. Maybe, I'm not sure. They might have sold out. Civic Music also has their event on Valentine's Day. It's an Irish, Dublin Irish dance. So that's at the Memorial Auditorium. And I hear a lot of people really love that show. Yeah, and I went and saw Charlie and the Chocolate Factory at the Capitol Theater on Saturday, and that was amazing to see on the big screen.
I bet.
You're goofy, man. That was awesome. Okay, Mr. Rinker, Counselor.
Nothing.
Jim Furneaux, City Manager.
Radio on Wednesday?
I'm in on that.
I can do it.
Okay,
I'm free Wednesday.
we're good on that.
All right, that's 9 o'clock. Southeast Iowa Days is next week for 2 council members who signed up, and I think
I'll be there.
you're going to, Nick. So that's next Wednesday,
It's gonna be a party.
Thursday?
Thursday.
Wednesday and Thursday.
Wednesday and Thursday, yes.
Yes. It starts about, I think it's.
11.
I think about my calendar.
It's
Either
so-
11 or
Yes,
12.
both.
And next week's meeting, reminder, is on Tuesday, not on Monday.
That's right.
So,
And tomorrow
what's tomorrow?
is the citizens.
Thursday.
Thursday.
Thursday. About to say.
For that first inaugural
500
Citizens
Tuesday.
Academy.
That would be on
All
Thursday.
right.
I will be late to that, but I will be there.
Oh, I was gonna be here.
So, yeah, that's gonna be over the course of 8 weeks,
Yeah.
That's
Not with
exciting.
us, just Thursday.
just Thursday for you. Yep.
Is that all you got,
That's it.
James? That's it? Just want to wish everybody happy Valentine's Day. And 2 days, it's the 14th. Valentine's Day's for lovers. So, Jeremy. Anyways, I just want to thank Hal Chase for the. I said do that. Just want to thank Hal Chase today. His email is Hal Chase Beyond Race. Rhonda was there. We had a luncheon today. And I want to thank Hal for spending time in Burlington and spending money in Burlington. Good conversation. He's going to do some good things, so it was a really good deal. I just want to encourage everybody to make sure you get out to eat in Burlington. I went down to Big Muddy's. It's new ownership now, and it's my first time getting to eat down there since the ownership changed. The food was just as good. I had a Reuben today that was heavenly. Chief, you loved it, my friend. But anyways, get out, support local business. I think that's it. Are we good to go? Good. All right, Annie, take us out.
This meeting is over.